Hi, I'm Carl Vervisch, and we're here with a special edition of AdCast today. We're from the University Community Center in Tampa, and we're here with Senator Victor Crist. Victor, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
We're here today to discuss a upcoming proposed ballot initiative on the Florida ballot, Amendment 5. This is marketed to voters as a property tax cut, but obviously we know it's a little bit more involved than that. What are the true, full implications of this to the Florida citizens?
Well, it's being sold as a tax cut. It's not really a tax cut. It's a shell game. What they're doing is they're shifting the burden of the funding of our school systems throughout the state to other sources. Part of it would be the sales tax, part of it would come from the state. They're just saying other sources. There's not really a definition of what those other sources are. From the first part, this is a problem because the only revenue base in Florida that's consistent is property taxes. It doesn't fluctuate like the other revenues that come into the state, like sales taxes. And when you're funding schools, you don't want a fluctuating revenue source because you need to be able to count on school operations year after year and know what dollars you have coming in order to plan and be consistent. The second problem is to the taxpayer, leaving it to the legislature for other sources. Well, there are no other sources. So the only way that they would be able to make up the dollar amount that would be lost, which is between $9 and $12 billion, is to raise other taxes or to create new revenue sources, which of course the revenue's got to come from who? The taxpayer. The problem with that is currently the money that you pay through your property taxes, you can write off your federal income tax return because they allow you to write that off as a deduction. If you were paying a tax through, let's say, sales tax or through fees, you're not going to be able to write that off. So that's going to create an additional tax burden on you that doesn't already exist. This is really a very poor way to handle the problem. I agree, as a homeowner, our taxes have gotten too high. The amount of money that we pay, or that I pay and other homeowners pay each month, it's just gotten out of hand with the escalating property values. But this just simply is the wrong way to fix that problem.
One of the things that opponents of Amendment 5 have singled out is the fact that it brings up a possible service tax in Florida. Can you talk a little bit about what impact that might have on the business climate in our state?
Well, to generate the $12+ billion to fund our schools, a 1% sales tax increase would only generate about $4 billion. That's going to leave about $9 billion short. And that shortfall is going to have to be made up somewhere. The first thing that the legislature is going to have to do is take a look at, well, what is it that's not being taxed now that could be taxed? Who has the exemptions? Well, the largest amount of exemptions from a dollar perspective are your services. And, in order to help make up the shortfalls, the legislature would probably look at reinstating a sales tax on all services. That still in itself would not be enough to generate the $9 billion shortfall. That would probably only generate about a third of what is needed. So the legislature would have to go back and take a look at what other possible revenue sources could we generate, which would mean new taxes.
Now, as Add to Tampa Bay being an organization of young professionals in Florida, one of the things that we've noted is it seems like young professionals might get the short end of the stick on this one.
There's a reason why Florida has chosen to opt out certain services from sales tax. The logic behind it was to, one, grow an industry, or two, change the way that an industry's obligation to pay for its services is collected. Why? Because if you've got an industry like, let's say, advertising or engineering or accounting, which you could have a firm in Florida provide that service, or just as easily hire a firm outside of Florida to do that service. If Florida is charging 7 or 8 or 9% sales tax on that service and another state is not, chances are to save 7 or 8 or 9%, you as a business person is going to choose to do business with a company that's outside the state because you immediately get that savings. So what we found back in 1987, when the legislature enacted a services tax, that a lot of these businesses, small mom and pop businesses that make up the bulk of our economy here in Florida, lost sizable revenues. And many of them had to shut down because business pulled out of Florida. I know that I owned an advertising agency, and we were one of the fastest growing shops in Tampa. And when the services tax hit over a course of 6 months, I lost 2/3 of my business. It was just easier for a client that had a sizable budget to use an ad agency in another state that didn't have to collect a percentage of that client's revenues for taxes.
Now, as we both know, this amendment was stricken from the ballot in mid-August as a result of a lawsuit that was filed against it. I guess my concern is, might it come back before November?
Anything's possible in this business. I know that the court was within their boundaries to strike it because the language that was going to the ballot really wasn't as descriptive as it should have been for the average voter to be able to understand what they were voting on. It was grossly misleading. I think the court made a wise decision in striking it. Of course, now it's at the Supreme Court level, and the Supreme Court's going to review it and see if the appellate courts, did their jobs or not. Whether or not they're willing to reinstate it or not is anybody's guess. I would hope not, because I think the current ballot language is grossly misleading. Secondarily, because it's just the wrong thing to do. I mean, everyone should have to pay their fair share, and we certainly need reductions in our property tax liabilities. But this is a hoax. This is fish oil, snake oil being sold as a cure-all, and it's just grossly unfortunate, because the average person out there is going to see this on the ballot and think that they're going to be saving money when in the long run they're actually going to be spending more.
Now, what advice would you give to voters out there who are going to face Amendment 5 and the other issues on the November ballot?
Well, the average voter needs to study each of the amendments that are on the ballot and understand that a ballot summary is just a few brief comments and not really a good picture of what it is they're voting on. And just because something is on the ballot doesn't mean that it's a good thing, because just about anybody out there with enough money can afford to pay to get what they need to put something on the ballot. And that is so unfortunate. But in Florida, it's easy to get issues on the ballot. And many a times we've had issues that were on the ballot and people voted for them, not understanding what they were voting for and doing something that they really didn't want to see done and regretted the consequences later. Amendment 5 will be just that. I believe that everyone who votes for it will regret that they ever did a year or two down the road after it's implemented. Once they realize that it will put our schools and our school children and the quality of education in jeopardy, once they realize that while they may save a little bit more on their property taxes, they're going to pay a whole lot more out of their monthly incomes, once they realize that this is just a sham shell game.
Senator Crist, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. We greatly appreciate you coming on and helping us discuss this topic and really educate the viewers at home about exactly what Amendment 5 might have in store for us as a state.
Thank you for having me. I'm always willing to help, and I'm proud to be an ad tour.
And thanks to you at home for tuning in to this special edition of AdCast. As always, I advise you at home to make good choices.